My watch just said 8,000 steps. I'm very happy.
Oh.
You guys wear these watches. That'll tell you how far you've been walking. This is my good friend, Jim Nicola.
Hi.
You got some fans in the house, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
You have some fans in the house.
I guess so.
Jim, I'm really curious about a lot of things, but first I wanted to let everybody know that at 10 minutes to, Jody's going to tell me, you guys can ask a few questions. And then we go out to the bar. So after that, come out to the bar. You can talk more to Jim as well. How many of you have been to any of the salons? Okay, great. So several of you have been. How many of you came to the salons 25 years ago? Yeah, and there were some people that did that too, which I think is amazing. Because we went online for the salons, right, during COVID. And now we're back, my farewell tour.
In the flesh.
And a farewell tour with you, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jim, you've got a long history with Rena.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in a bit of shock as we were over on the wharf. And we were talking about all of the multitude of changes. And when you were here, talk about what the energy of the theater was in the 80s. And this was during the time that Zelda Fitch-Handler, who started the theater, was the artistic director.
In what sense do you mean the energy of being on staff?
I think it's being on staff, yeah.
Well, it was a much smaller entity, first of all.
Right.
This, just walking around these halls feels like there has been growth.
Yeah.
There has been growth. It felt like a mom and pop store, almost.
Interesting.
And now it feels like a grown-up.
Mm-hmm. With a bunch of grandkids.
Yeah,
Yeah.
truly, yes. But I mean, I came in August of 1980, so in September of 1980, the 30th anniversary season was beginning. And I had just turned 30 in July.
Wow.
So, and when I did the math, I realized I'm born July 5th, 1950, and I think the first performances were like July 15th, something like that?
Actually, August 16th,
So, yeah.
1950.
Yeah. So I'm a month older than this entity.
Oh, I love that. I love that, Jim.
But I didn't quite put those pieces together. And now, of course, I have much more of a sense of what 30 years of work might mean for someone like Zelda.
Yeah.
I was just in awe of being in her presence. And I think somewhat we were talking earlier about the generational differences. And I left Joseph Papp's house and came to Zelda's house. And there was that for me was being in the presence of masters. And I think I was able to understand that both of them, I think it really occurred to me watching Zelda, actually, that the two of them were artists of their own, in their own right, that the making of space was as significant a theatrical discipline as writing a play, or being an actor, or being a director, or designer, that was a particular gift that both of them had. So it felt like Zelda was in full flower in a place that was hers. And now it feels, I think actually the difference is it really feels like this is a community institution. And then it was not yet.
Yep.
It was on its way.
Yep. That's great, Jim. Well, I'm really curious because Jim and I were talking before coming in just about changes over periods of time. And because we've both been working in the theater for probably about 50 years each, those kinds of changes and the kind of revolution, evolution that we're going through now. So here's your first stump question. Nobody can really describe what's happening now. A lot of people it's like an elephant in the middle of the room that everybody's blindfolded and they're all saying it's about the trunk, it's about the feet, it's about the this, it's about the that. What would Zelda say?
Oh. Are you speaking of in the theater world, the form, or are you speaking of the larger world?
Both. Either. But I'm really curious about the theater since we're here talking about the theater. What would she say about what's going on? Because what Jim and I were talking about is the creation of all of these theaters 75 years ago. That was a big revolution. That was a revolution. We're going to do great theater outside of New York. We're going to create our own theaters in our own communities, and we're going to do brilliant theater, and it's going to be indigenous to an area. And now we're in the middle of the next revolution. People haven't recognized it yet as a revolution, but we're in it. And it's going to take about 10 years to go through this revolution. And it's one that's operating on zillions of different levels, from the hashtag #MeToo movement to We See You White America to pay structure, to the way in which young people work with older people, to the way in which programming is done, to job studies. I mean, it goes on and on and on. We're in the middle of it. But nobody seems to really be able to see it. Would she be able to see it?
Well, yes, for sure. She was a very astute. And what I also felt very special about her, and probably because I think in some ways we were similar temperamentally like this.
Yeah.
That it was always a balance between intuition, emotion, and reason and logic. And they couldn't be separated with her, that they were always at play. So she would feel something or sense something, and then that rational part of her brain would take over, and she'd make sense of it in a different frame. But when is it not? When are we not in a revolution? When are we not in an evolution? When are we not in a moment of transformation? Generationally, I think what Zelda and her contemporaries were doing was dealing with a culture that was trying to figure out itself. And Zelda and her contemporaries felt like we're in a culture that's adolescent. And what do we need to become fully functioning, fully complex adults? And one of those things that they provided was that theater, I'm sort of ranging all over the place here, sorry about that. There's a quote from Helen Shaw, who's now the major critic for the New Yorker magazine. But before that, she was in various downtown publications. She said, "There's no place more dangerous to be than a seat in the theater." And I just can't not think about that, because I think it is true. There's no place where you can sit and be safe, but go to the most dangerous, terrifying places and still be firm. And for personally, also I don't think there's anything in life, about living, about our history as a species, our history as a culture, my own personal history, anyone's history, that I haven't learned personally about it sitting in a theater seat. And there's something to me about learning collectively, sitting together, sitting amongst people that I don't know, probably, and experiencing a sequence of events, a narrative reenacted, that reveal things. And they land more powerfully and provocatively in my imagination than just reading a page or being told something. So I think that's the thing they thought they were providing to this adolescent community. That theater was not just what we started out with in this culture, which was it was a sort of transgressive thing. It was in our puritanical root. If you're not with Jesus, you're with Satan. So if you're not in church, you're looking at a dancing lady, looking at her ankles, and its appeal was transgressive. It was sensual, and that was not what a Puritan wanted to do.
Right.
But only in the mid-20th century did people start to understand that some of the rest of the people on the planet saw theater as a place of ideas and not just sensuality and emotion, that it was about ideas. And they thought this would be a good thing to provide. And I think at the time that they were finding people who agreed with them. At this point, that is over. That's gone. That case has been made and accepted or not accepted, and we can discuss that. But we're on to a different thing now. The role of theater in this culture that has now grown up some from the mid-20th century, it has to provide different things. And I think that's what we're trying to figure out. What is this place? What is the place of a theater maker and a community?
That's great. That's great. I think that's true. I also think it's true that it is almost impossible for the theater to provide everything. And that now is the desire of people within the theater, is that the theater will provide everything. The theater will provide all the answers to social ills. The theater will fix everything in this society.
Right.
As opposed to, the theater actually reflects what's going on in the society and fights with the society or talks to the society. And there's a difference now where it's happening a lot internally in the theaters. There's that fight within theaters as opposed to turning that out. I think that's going to shift because eventually it's going to boil over and it'll push out. Whether it has to do with climate change, whether it has to do with the left and the right. Why wouldn't we be in the middle of a revolution? America's in the middle of a revolution.
Absolutely.
And I would agree with you, the theater's always in revolutions, but they're mini revolutions. This feels big and sprawling. Okay, I'll ask you an easier question. But you answered that one really well. Okay, so the easier question is, this is a man who always has had a nose for some of the greatest material that has gone on stage, projects like Rent. And I just want to know, Jim, how did you find that? How did you follow it? And what kind of advice do you have for theater makers now in terms of following their noses to the best projects? How did you do that? How did you do it with Once? How did you do it with Slave Play? It's like a who's who.
Well, I'm going to go back to
Hades Town, right? All these that Jim premiered.
I think this is again, I'm theorizing about looking back on my own life, and I might not be the most objective or clear-eyed about that, but sitting in Zelda's house, I think about that, and I think both she and Joe, those are the two major mom and dad of me theatrically, they lived in that place that I've tried to, not consciously, but I realized that was I was doing it unconsciously. Meeting theater makers, directors, writers, actors, and feeling and seeing what they were up to. And then I'll pick up an example, because maybe that's the best way to talk about this. The play called Slave Play that we did. We had been at the New York Theater Workshop engaged in a very conscious and structured process of learning about white supremacy, the innate racism that we were blind to, all of what we're all experiencing, I think, right now. And it was interesting to me, and I was learning a lot, but it was academic, it was theoretical. And when I sat through the reading of Slave Play that we did, because my preference was always, I could read a play for sure, but for me to actually have any serious opinion of work, I had to hear it in the mouths of actors. So readings were really critical for me. I really felt like I couldn't talk about it until that point. Sat in that room and heard that play. And I had an emotional response to what the play was talking about. And I remember the thought went through my head, I think I'm learning more about all of this that we're so focused on right now from this play than I am anything that has been taught to me in a seminar or a course or anything in a more academic or sort of abstracted way. And that always would lead me to, I think maybe there's probably more people than just me who will have that feeling or who will have the same experience. So that was always it. And it was, I take that back to the family lore. I don't remember this because I was 4, but evidently when I was 4, when asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, it was to be a minister in the Baptist church that I grew up in the Baptist church. And I think actually that's exactly what I did, just not in a religious frame, in a secular frame.
Right.
That this was about communicating things that meant something to me and this goes to something you were referencing earlier. I much prefer to sit in a theater seat and not be told something. Probably something that I know and wouldn't disagree with, whatever. And that what I most treasure is when I come out asking questions and not knowing what to think, or realizing that my task is to think this through, and the charge that has been given to me by the theater makers is I have to go out and be a warrior and make this world a better place. And what this person, who these makers have just done, is to make me a little better at that job. So I think that's what it was, always, that there was something about the work that felt compelling to me personally, and I suspected there were other people that wanted to hear it. So that would be it. That's the answer to the question.
Well, it's so interesting because I used to watch you all the time at New York Theater Workshop, and you'd always be in your office having these long, extended, hour-long conversations with artists. And you would just be on one-on-one or one-on-3 or whatever, and you just talk and talk and talk. And they'd talk, and then you guys would talk some more. And then maybe 6 months later, you'd decide to do the play.
Yeah. Well, another part of this, what I had described is probably the sort of fundamental of it, but a next step of it would be that I always felt I was going to have to be a collaborator with these makers, and that I was going to have to usher this through, and there would be battles, there would be arguments with the managing director about the budget for the set, and that I would have to feel in my gut, connected to this struggle so that I could fight and be a good collaborator. And a lot of things that I responded to, I would find in those conversations you're describing, maybe I'm not the right collaborator for this person, that there's not a good chemistry with us. So then I would think that, they need to go find that good collaborator, because it's not me.
Was that a hard discussion to have with people?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because it was like breaking hearts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they would think, oh, we're going to do this, and then it would be, I don't know if we're the right place.
The good thing is, just recently, I had a conversation with someone who said to me that essentially I had said that to this woman 25 years ago, and now she views that as one of the most important things that was said to her ever. Because she hadn't really understood at the time that what she was seeing is there's a theater. It's a theater I like. Maybe they can produce my play. And it didn't occur to her that she had some power in choosing that collaborator. It didn't have to be New York Theater Workshop.
Right.
It could be that she had the right to find that right collaborator.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Jim, you and I have really restless imaginations, and we both like to travel a lot. And I don't know is Philip Arnaud out here? There's Philip, okay. We've traveled with this man before.
Yes, we have.
And we've traveled to places like Hungary and Russia and Eastern Europe. And Philip is one of the great internationalists who actually helps make connections between theater makers, theater artists here in the United States, artistic directors, and directors in other countries. And Jim and I went to Hungary. That's where I found János Száz, who you will see his incredible production of Angels in America, which is just in technical rehearsals right now. And I knew it as soon as I saw his production of Mother Courage, that, okay, this is the person that I want. I would love to ask him. And Rob Orchard, who is from ART, I said to him, I'm going to talk to János about coming to the United States, to Arena. He said, oh, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. It's far too early. It's far too early. You shouldn't do that. I said, I'm going to do it. This is what I want to do. I'm going to have a conversation with him. He said, well, I totally disagree with you. So I went and talked to János. Within 10 minutes, he was talking to him about a project, too. I just thought, oh, boy. That was a little swarmy on his part, I have to say. But anyway, we were there. And eventually, we were also in Amsterdam, where we saw people like Ivo van Hove. And you've had a long tradition with him. So talk about him as a theater maker and what connected you to him. Because a lot of American artistic directors are not interested in going any place other than England to see work, right? And we were both more interested in let's go further afield. Let's go someplace where people would be interpreting our work from an entirely different point of view.
Well, yeah, you just landed on one of my passions in life. This is all interesting how this all connects. I am hoping that one of the things that is coming of this evolution that we're in, this revolution, this transformation, the birth of the 21st century, the theater of the 21st century, is that it's not so focused on American theater. Mm-hmm. And it's stunning to me still at this point how a writer, a director, an actor, whatever, will think nothing of getting on a plane and going 3,000 miles to Los Angeles or go to Chicago and see a play or something. But to go 3,000 miles the other way, other than England, is inconceivable. And to some extent that is about the language barrier, but it also speaks to the sort of insularity of American theater. And it's not going to go forward until there's other impulses and other influences in it. So that has always been my ground zero of exploring the world, is how do we help American makers find a future that's not just repeating or digesting for the 4 millionth time the things that we see. I went to see a play at an off-Broadway not-for-profit theater in New York a couple of months back, and it was a particularly dark moment in my personal life, and I was sitting in that seat almost having stolen the time away from a crisis that was going on. And I sat there and I settled into my seat and I looked at the stage and I thought, ugh, yet one more play where this set that I'm looking at is the same that I've seen for decades, my entire life. There's a sofa, there's a kitchen table, there's a kitchen sink, a stove, a refrigerator, a front door. I thought, this is the death of this theater. This can't be what we want in the 21st century. It just can't. It cannot be. What are we going to do? How many times have I sat in this particular theater and seen this set? And how many plays could happen in this space? And then, of course, the play happened, and I was knocked the fuck out. So much for that. But it still holds.
Yep.
That, you know, we walk into a space where our collective imaginations are alive, and we can be anywhere, and we keep repeating things. We keep making the same kind of nice little apartment plays. And when you go to theater in other countries and other cultures, they're not doing that. They're doing a little bit of that, but not exclusively or to the point of mindless repetition. So when our friend Philip here invited me to Amsterdam, there was a wonderful organization there called the Netherlands Theater Institute. And what they did was, way back, this would be 94, I'm going to guess, well underway at that point. They videotaped every production that occurred in the Netherlands, and they had it in a library. And this was, in my American frame, really unusual. I mean, I just couldn't figure out how Actors Equity would approve of that. But anyway, there they were. So I heard about this director who was young and kind of making a little bit of noise, and we couldn't, there was nothing of his on in the vicinity. So the Netherlands Theater Institute librarian sat me down and gave me a stack of old VHS tapes of the productions of his. And it turned out to be a number of O'Neill plays, some classic Greek plays. But when I saw the production of, I can't remember which O'Neill it was, but anyway, it was the O'Neill play, and I saw clearly this was a person who was obsessed with American culture, but he was not of this culture. He was an observer of this culture, and he looked at it differently and evoked a whole different kind of theatricality that made these plays, which I thought I knew O'Neill plays. They came alive in a way, and Philip's program paid for me to go to Antwerp and have a coffee with him, and we started this conversation. And then Philip paid for him to come and visit us. And he came in the middle of Rent, the previews of Rent, and Jonathan had just died. And then it went from there. But that was the impulse, was about how do we enliven. And also, at that moment in New York, something that was very exciting was, that was relatively new, was the Brooklyn Academy of Music had started a Next Wave Festival, which was bringing companies from around the world, dance, theater, and also companies like the Pina Bausch company that would collapse borders between theater and dance. And they're all one. But what the metaphor I always used about that was what BAM was doing was think of a beautiful formal garden that had pathways that all kind of converged on a beautiful marble table in the center of it. And what Bam would do was change the bouquet that sat on that table once a week. So you would walk those paths and you'd come to this beautiful thing. And it would be marvelous because one would be from China and one, the next week, the bouquet would be from Chile and so forth. And when the bouquet got old, they took the bouquet and threw it away. But it never mingled, the seeds never mingled with this garden. And I thought, that's what's missing. So the thing that would make it be useful was if Ivo came with some of his collaborators, designers, dramaturgs, but worked with American artists as well. This would be the seeds intermingling, and things might be some new hybrid plants would emerge. So that was the idea. And it kind of went from there. And so much of what I got to see and people that I invited to, most of them were extended conversations that didn't pan out ultimately. But with Ivo, which was an exceptional example.
Yeah, because you did 3 or 4 projects with him,
Yeah,
right?
at least, I think it was 5 or 6.
5 or 6, yeah. Which was a pretty
Yeah.
long, extended conversation.
But it was partly that happened because he was willing to shrink his process of making to fit what Americans could afford and what we were, the resources we had to work with. Most of the other artists from other cultures that we tried to make something happen with foundered on that equation. Like, how do you take someone who works with a company of actors for 6 months before they have their first performance, and we have 4 weeks? And it's not a resident company. It's, you come and do auditions. And most of those people that we worked with said, what is an audition? Because they had resident companies that they worked with. So those were things that were insurmountable.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's very different bringing somebody in from another culture. Janusz, are you here? Oh, good, I can talk about you. Because he works in a very, very different way. And
Yep.
it's not like the way that, our American system that artisans work in, which is he goes in, and if you were to see a sheet on a daily basis of all the things that are needed in a rehearsal, all the new props, all the new set pieces, all the new costume pieces, it's head spinning. And that's because that's the way they're used to working. And so we've had to find ways to be able to kind of focus it down. He came and directed a brilliant production of Streetcar Named Desire here. Because our work
when was
here
that?
is, pardon?
When was that?
That was in 2000. Because what we were doing here is what happens because we do so much American work. All we do is American work, but what happens if somebody from another culture comes in and looks at it, which is very much the same kind of through line you were going on, Jim. And it was a shocking production. Did everybody see it here? Okay. So you remember the opening scene was almost an earthquake in the Fitch, and 2 little girls, Blanche and Stella, were walking through the earthquake holding hands with their long hair. That was the beginning of Streetcar Named Desire. So it was a Streetcar Named Desire, unlike any Streetcar Named Desire anybody had seen. And people either adored it or wanted to write about it.
Yep.
And I think it will probably be the same thing with Angels in America. He is interpreting this 30-year masterwork.
God.
And it's always time to interpret our masterworks in a different way. Yeah, they just see it through a different lens because they're not Americans. And
Yep.
I love it. It's volatile work. And it's exciting and thrilling. So, Philip, thank you. Look at what you've spawned.
Yes.
Yeah. So I have a question about, Jim has just retired. After how many years, Jim?
Well, I was 34 at New York Theater Workshop.
34 years.
8 years before that here.
Yep.
5 years before that at the New York Shakespeare Festival. Yep.
You've had a long run.
Yeah.
So what are your hopes and dreams now? What are you moving into?
Well, I'm still figuring it out. I'm doing a little bit of teaching. which is the obvious thing, I think. I'm trying to figure out what I might do to contribute to this evolution that we're talking about. What is it that I could, what could I do to help the warriors as they go forward? What can I help them to learn to, or whatever, to build the houses they want to live in? And I'm not quite sure what that is. I think something about, I feel the thing I keep coming back to is what I've been talking about, which is the need for Americans to get out of the house. So I just read about Julie Taymor's, have you heard about those?
No.
She's made a little fund where she'll pick 3 directors, young American directors, and pays for them to go outside the United States.
That's so great.
And observe.
Jim and I were just talking also about American directors, and probably maybe 30 years ago, there was a big movement in this country to begin talking about American directors in working with living writers as being a midwife. And I was suspect in that regard too. I think I use that term at different points. But I've grown to be very distrustful of it because I think it takes away the interpretive power of the director. It moves them into being like this, as opposed to part of the director's job is actually to challenge, to question, to interpret whatever this piece of art is, as opposed to, I'm going to make this play exactly what was in the writer's head. Well, that's completely impossible. You can't get into somebody else's head in that way. You can barely be inside your own head. And so how can you do that? And I think it's been a problem because it's meant that directors have become second-class citizens in this country, as opposed to in other countries where they're an important part of the artistic conversation. We're not seen as auteurs. We're seen as workmanlike in that way. And I just think that's a problem. I actually think that's the other thing that we can learn from directors from other countries is their ability to be able to interpret and create, and to be able to create big worlds out there, and to kind of be fearless around it. And I think that's so important in the training of directors now, Jim, because I feel like it has lessened the ability to be able to dream and create these big worlds. And I think we've done it to ourselves. And I count myself as someone who said that a number of years ago. I don't say it now, but you'll never hear me say midwife again, because I actually don't even think it's true. But it moves the director into saying, well, what do you want as the writer? Well, the writer doesn't know. The writer's done their job. They've sat in a room for a year or 2 years and written, and what they need now is a collaborator in order to interpret what they've done.
I had a really powerful, it's still with me, experience of this and the role of the director.
Yeah.
And the challenges of being that kind of director, the right kind of director, in my opinion, in this culture. And I was still at the New York Shakespeare Festival, sitting at my desk. So this would be late 70s. And there was a particularly conservative and opinionated music critic for the New York Times. And the New York City Opera had hired this young revolutionary director from downtown, from La Mama, but also Romanian, Andrei Serban, to direct an opera by Handel called Xerxes. And the review was a scathing dismissal of what Andrei did, because he made it sort of like, this was pre-Star Wars and so forth. He made it sort of an outer space adventure kind of thing. And this director, this critic just went insane, in rage, full rage at the audacity of this director to desecrate Handel like this. And I started to think about that. And I thought, now wait a minute. The implication here is that there is a right way to do this piece, and this is not the right way to do the piece. So what is the right way to do the piece? Because a big thing was it was not, that the critics saying was not historically correct. And I thought, okay, well, it's an ancient Greek story, and we're in 1978 America. Handel was German, but living in England when he wrote this, and it was an English text that was translated from the Italian, which was his original thing. When they wrote it, he wrote it for castrati to sing it. We do not have those. He wrote it for an orchestra that probably is not the orchestra that we have now, because those instruments have evolved. So where do we find this rock bottom way of it being done? Plus, the audience that's assembling at the New York State Theater is not the audience that was in London in 17 whatever, or in Greece in whatever. So this is what a director does. This is it. They take a piece that is a Greek myth, seen through the eyes of a German living in England in 1770 something, and they make it mean something to us gathering in a room now. Hadestown, exactly. So that was the most potent understanding I had about what a director does. The director is the author of the event. The playwright is the author of the text. Mm-hmm. And we do not have respect. We do in film for the director.
Course. Totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we do not in American theater
And we
practice.
don't have respect for the writer in film. We
Correct.
have respect for the director in film.
Correct.
Yeah, it's the exact opposite.
Yep.
Which is really weird.
So this is part of the evolution that we have to get to. We have to find a place where everyone is respected.
That's right. Do you have any questions for me, Jim?
Yes.
Okay.
This is out of something that's going on in my life right at the moment. I'm about to have a conversation with, do you know Frank Hengscher at the CUNY Graduate Center in New York?
Oh, okay.
He does these public, very much this idea. So he asked me and Linda Chapman, who's been the Associate Artistic Director at the workshop forever, to come and have a chat. And we had lunch with him 2 days ago, and he said, well, what do you think this should be? And I said, well, maybe the opportunity here is to get Stephen Graham, who was the founder of the workshop, in a different form. It was his private foundation that then turned into New York Theater Workshop he founded it in 79. He hired a person to be the administrator of that foundation named Gene Passanante, who became the artistic director in 83 when it became New York Theater Workshop. Me, Linda, and now Patricia McGregor, who is the new artistic director of New York Theater Workshop. Let's all be on the stage together and talk about this is what it started, this is what it became.
That's great.
Now what's going to happen?
That's great.
So my question to you is, you're in a moment to be thinking about the transformation of Arena in different ways, and you've been a huge chunk of that life. And where is it going? What do you see? What happened when you came, and what is now? And what is that story? What is that narrative for you?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I wish I would have thought to ask you that question. I was fortunate because in the 1970s, I was a student here in Washington, D.C., so I used to come and see productions at Arena Stage. And I happened to be here during the American years as well. It was the bicentennial years when Zelda was doing all American work, because of course she had much more of a focus on Eastern Europeans and the classics. Then when Doug Wager came in after 40 years, he started moving into some new plays and also musicals. So I would say what the evolution has been is that Zelda had a company for 40 years. By the time Doug came in, that company had mostly dissolved. And by the time I came in, it was almost all gone. Although, interestingly enough, none of the company members knew when it was dissolved. Each one that I spoke to did not know. It just kind of dissolved itself because it became financially really complicated for the theater to continue it because it was 52 weeks a year where, you have 30 members of a company. So I would say that Zelda, she built the foundation, right? And the foundation was about great theater. That's really what she wanted to do, and great theater outside of New York. And great theater that was not pushed and pulled by the vagaries of the for-profit theater. Well, that still is in operation today. That was not a revolution that was won. But I would say that foundation of creating great work and work that has social meaning has been something that has been a big through line for me. Mm-hmm. Another big through line is this was the first theater to integrate in Washington, D.C. Before then, the theaters were all segregated. And that's because we sit in an area of Washington, D.C. that was the area of the worst urban renewal in the country. And 30,000 African American people were pushed out of this area. And that was the old Southwest. So for me, when I came in, and because there was this through line that really had to do with race, it was really important for me to reflect the whole city. So in my first months of being here, I walked the city and I walked the neighborhoods. And even though I'd been here as a student, I wasn't here as an adult. And as an adult, I would go into Baptist churches and I would listen to preachers preach. I would watch the way in which they would welcome people in to the community and say, welcome, 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 come in. And I realized, oh, right, theater is such an elite art form for so many people. Let's break down those reserves here in Washington, D.C. So we actually changed how the usher structure worked so that people would welcome people all the way through the theater. And then about a third of the work that we started doing were always about people of color. And our audience shifted. When I came in, the audience was probably 5% people of color, and now it's about 30%. It's all about the work. It's all about the repertoire. And Zelda said at one point is, your repertory is destiny. Mm. Within 5 years of whatever you're doing, that's the audience that you're going to have. And I just believe that that's totally true. So I would say there have been a number of through lines, but the evolution is, I think Arena has moved much more into relationship to various communities here in this city. I think before, and this was just the nature of the time, it was more of an ivory tower. It was more the artist in the ivory tower. You see that in the structure of the way in which we designed this building. It's transparent to the whole city. It's about, see us. We are here with you. We want you here with us. I mean, the big glass wall tells it all. You actually see the art being made. And that was something important to me as opposed to the American brutalism that the Fitch Handler is. It's looking inside, right? It's internal. It's up on an ivory tower. And this is more open of the people. So I'd say that has been one of the biggest evolutions, Jim. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking about my paternal grandparents are Italians or Italian immigrants, and from the north around Torino. And in my childhood, Italian food that you would find was pizza, spaghetti and meatballs, a certain sort of standard fare. Now, when I go to an Italian restaurant. I find polenta, risotto,
Right.
all these things that were like weirdly particular to my Italian American family from the north, because most of Italian Americans in the U.S. are Southerners or Central. But I think the metaphor here is that I think when Zelda and her compatriots started, they were selling something that no one really understood or had a taste for.
Right.
And they were trying to develop a market. And now there is a market, and now what do we do? You
Right.
know, maybe a better metaphor is something like Starbucks. You know, they started somewhere small,
Right.
and they've become whatever. And maybe that's where we're now, that we have a market, we have established a relationship with a community, with
Right.
consumers, if you want to keep going that way. But what those tastes keep changing, and we
Yeah.
have to keep engaging.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was telling Jim about Ride the Cyclone, which, you know, the reason why we chose that was for young people and to bring young people into the theater. And what happened? They came, but what else happened? All of our older audiences loved it too. And so I'd have people, you know, 75-year-old woman who said to me, it changed my life. Somebody else who was 80 said, I've come to see it 5 times. I mean, it was truly a phenomena. So one doesn't actually know what the public's taste is.
Right.
People constantly say, well, we're going to do a survey and we're going to find out. In Alaska, we did a survey, and my favorite answer was, I love the comedies. What was your favorite play? Macbeth. So you
You
have...
said that in the theater.
I did, but you know what? We do American work here, so it's fine. Nothing's going to happen to us. Okay, and I see Jody's here. So please ask questions, and we have a mic, right? Yeah, we've got a question. Oh, is that Riley?
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-oh. Riley. Go, Riley, go.
I want to go back to your opening question, Molly.
Yeah.
Which was what this theater was in the beginning. And it was in the middle of the Cold War, and Zelda explored the Russian playwrights,
Right.
giving us some idea of the humanity of the Russian people that we did not understand. It felt to me like it was a collateral attack, important, but collateral attack on the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Today, that kind of collateral attack seems to be a little bit of a luxury. How do you address the compelling imperatives in a risky way when you have the financial imperatives of a place like this?
Yeah. Well, we keep taking risks, Riley. I mean, audiences can smell risk. If we're not risking, you guys wander away. And that's the truth. That is the truth. I mean, I think there's a collateral attack by doing Angels in America right now.
It wasn't when it was done.
It wasn't when it was done 30 years ago. It is now.
I agree.
It is now because of what it says in terms of gay people, drag queens. I mean, it's all in there. It's in the world. So how odd. 30 years ago, it was something that was just part of the public and the public's understanding. And now it's become something shocking for people. Pardon? Yes, that would be a direct attack. That's right. That's right. Is it a more obvious attack? Is it a more provocative, in your face?
Yeah, it's certainly provocative.
Yeah.
I ultimately felt like it wasn't my place in the role that I played to tell people what they should think or think about.
Yeah.
That what my place was to make sure they thought, and that they were activated, and that they were motivated to get out there, and that the opportunity was you're sitting together to observe and participate in with the work of these artists, and that it's meant to activate your mind and activate your spirit, and that the answers are not going to be coming from the stage, they're going to be coming in your mind, in your spirit, and your passion. And so there has to be a certain humility
Yeah.
to that in the role that I played, I felt.
And a certain activism.
Yes.
I mean, it's both.
Yes.
It's both, but
it's a guess on what that was
Yeah.
always it. When I said I felt like there probably were other people that would feel the same way as me.
Yeah.
That was that guess.
Yeah.
Is that I'm feeling this fired me up and taught me a lot, and maybe that will happen for other people. That was what that was.
Yeah, I love that. Do we have another question out here? A burning desire? A question, surely there has to be a question. Yes,
You talked about segregation in Washington.
yes.
I'm from the South. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. You talk about segregation here in Washington, D.C. I'm from
Yes.
the South, and it was quite different. It was overt, colored white, etc. Many people believe that there wasn't even segregation in Washington. How did you see that? How is it manifested here when it wasn't quite as stark as it was, like the place where I grew up, like in Columbus, Georgia, you know?
Yeah.
Where we
Yeah.
had Ku Klux Klan and other kind of things. In Washington, D.C., it was a little more subtle.
I think in some ways it was probably more subtle, but I think that when the riots happened after the assassination of Martin Luther King, all of the burning that happened in this city really created very strong lines between the races. And I would say even before then, Black Broadway, which is down on U Street, was an area where African American performers and people would gather. So I think that there were real color lines here. I mean, I would ask, Riley, if I'm misspeaking in any way, please stop me. You know, it's the same way about this area of the city, that Southwest Washington, what it used to be before gentrification took hold in 1950. That kind of gentrification's happened all over this city, where African American people have been moved out into Prince George's County, moved out into different areas, different residencies, and white people have moved in. So that's not subtle. I mean, that's dramatic, because that has to do with people's lives, their livelihood, their homes. I mean, it's been pretty shocking in this city. This city, when I first came in the 70s, I think it was like 75 or 80% African American. It now is 50-50. So you see what the shift has been
Is that
quite,
really?
quite,
Wow.
quite dramatic. It used to be called Chocolate City, right? Exactly. So it's a very different city. I mean, it's a city that is, culturally dense. We have everything from go-go music to, it's an incredible city what's been created here. Okay, I'm going to turn to one more question. Yes?
If you were to give advice to a young playwright, what would you say is the biggest mistake that young playwrights make?
Are you addressing that to either of us?
Take your pick. Yeah, both of you.
Okay, I'll jump in real fast. I would say what one is always looking for is an original voice. And if it doesn't get me in the first 10 pages, I'm gone. I put it aside. Jim may be somebody who reads all the way through. If I'm captured by it, man, I'm going to read in the midnight hours. But if I'm not, at a certain point, there isn't a voice there for me. Now, there may be a voice for somebody else, maybe Woolly Mammoth, maybe Mosaic, maybe one of the other theaters in town. But there needs to be something there that's compelling.
Yeah, I think it's and probably continuing my theme. To 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 try and sort through the complex, contradictory thing of what do I need to make that is recognizable in the marketplace, but not erase my unique element, my person, who I am, what my voice is. And most of the time I would, when looking at new plays, I would look at things that I've sensed the writer is too balanced toward trying to sell something that they think is ready to be sold or to be bought, and leaving themselves out of it.
And you
They're-
like it when they leave themselves in it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's that whole idea of what's the voice? What am I hearing from this person? What's unusual about it, as opposed to what could be written by 90% of the public. You know, it's that unusual voice that makes you prick up your ears. It's the way somebody uses language. It's the way somebody sets up a scene of something that just pulls you into it.
I would also say the things that always attracted me, again, I'm repeating myself, but if I sensed someone was telling me something, this is what I think and you should think, that was less interesting to me than someone who would construct an event that led me to an idea that hatched in my own brain. To empower me as the listener, the viewer.
And sometimes I really like it when I'm reading something that I don't quite understand. And then tell me more. I mean, that's what I'm saying
Yeah.
to the writers I'm reading. Tell me more. Tell me more.
Yep.
Let me understand. That's a great place to end, but the party doesn't end. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for asking me.